I felt like a bitch, so I built something for a witch. Also, I'm an idiot. Let's use that as an intro because it basically perfectly summarizes this video. But yeah, we're building a witch's inn. Just kidding, we're building a university, or at least it started out as a witch's inn. But then I realized if I built any more inn/taverns, nobody's going to believe me anymore if I say that I don't have a problem. Also, just the vibe transformed from inn to university, which doesn't make sense unless I explain it. But then there's also the point of I'm an idiot. I'm a dumbass. And that's because I keep making the same mistakes all over again constantly because, yeah, for the first 10 to 11 minutes there's not going to be a mouse or a cursor because I forgot to turn the recording on for also recording the mouse/cursor, so that problem is back again. I forgot to turn it on, so yeah, for the first 11 minutes, I'm a total dumbass. Past that point, I'm just a dumbass. Anyway, so as I said, this build started out as a witch's inn, transformed into a university because of multiple reasons. But the reason that we're building this and we're back in Valhalla, it's been a long time since we were in Valhalla in a video. We are back in Valhalla when it comes to streams, but for videos, we're still in Conceptualizing. But the reason why we're back in Valhalla is because, well, this build basically. Like, I saw this reference image which was named Witch's Inn, so that's why it started out as an inn. But I saw that image and I've seen it before, I know for sure. But for some reason it just hit me. Like, it grabbed my soul, or what's left of it, and it grabbed my throat and smacked my face onto the keyboard, just shouting, "Poison, build this! Poison, build this!" And I have zero self-control, so I started building it. Like, some images just have that, can control you basically like that. Like, I have to build this right now. And also then there's the added thing of like Conceptualizing, basically almost finished, or at least season 3 is almost finished. Don't worry, there is going to be a season 4, but Conceptualizing only has 2 more builds remaining, which puts the pressure on me to make sure that I'm not going to pull a Game of Thrones in which the first and middle part of it is good/amazing, especially for the beginning part, and then the last part or the last season is so shit that you want to forget that Game of Thrones existed. So I don't want to pull a Game of Thrones. I want to make sure that the last 2 builds of Conceptualizing season 3 are just as amazing as the ones coming or that came before. I have lost all sense of proper grammar, but then I don't think I ever had it. I want to make sure that the last builds are amazing. I don't want to go out on like a mediocre build. Yeah, that makes it that I'm running and hiding in Valhalla. Enjoy. But yeah, this build just, as I said, it just grabbed me. So even though I knew like, oh, it's probably going to be easier and better if I just finish off Conceptualizing, so that I have like that peace of mind that like, oh, Conceptualizing is finished. It goes behind the scenes for a month or so and then comes back to like have like the cinematic showcasing and such. Yeah, let's just forget that. Let's hide in Valhalla. Let's hide by building an inn that transformed into a university. The reason why it transformed into a university is, well, there are multiple. The first one is that it started out looking like an inn. Like an inn has that like sort of cozy, inviting vibe. You could also just, I could imagine drunk people coming out of this build for basically every hour of the day. Like, inns just sometimes have that vibe of like, yeah, I can definitely see drunk people coming out of that. But the more I build it, like it is basically just a copy of the reference image, which again was named Witch's Inn. But then I just built in Planet Zoo, just started to feel kind of more official. Some builds just have that like official vibe, or some buildings in real life, even though they might not be a governmental building, they look like a governmental building or give that off that vibe. If they're not a school, they just sometimes give off the vibe of a school, and then you're like, oh, that's not a school. It gives the vibe of a school. And that's what basically happened with this build. For a long time it gave off the vibe of an inn, but then it shifted when it started to give off that professional vibe, and then I thought, I always wanted to build a university in Valhalla. Why not make this building in like the main building of a university or a college? I think it's probably a college. University just sounds a lot better, so let's just say that's a university. And Valhalla was always going to have something of like a university or a college, just because it just felt good, like having like a university in Torstad, because there was always that kind of thought of like having a university. But I also wanted to not fall into the stereotype that you usually have when you're thinking about Vikings and Scandinavia in the Viking period, which is that like everybody was raiding and pillaging England or France or just any Western European land with a coastline. The stereotype that you usually have when it comes to Vikings or Scandinavian people in the Viking era is that everybody was a Viking, which is not the case. Vikings were kind of like a subset of that culture, or like basically a job description. But yeah, there were just as many farmers, probably a lot more than there were Vikings. Not every Scandinavian person in the Viking era was a warrior who was pillaging and rampaging and constantly drunk, and just there's this certain stereotype when it comes to Vikings and Scandinavian people in the Viking era. I also wanted to kind of just break that down. It's just like Torstad is supposed to be on the edge of civilization. Torstad is supposed to be like the last bastion of civilization before you go into like the uncharted Northlands, the wild Northlands, which for Nosgodos, yeah, Nosgodos is the continent, I would say, where Valhalla is set in. Valhalla is supposed to be just a tiny valley, actually not even a noteworthy valley in Nosgodos, and the entirety of Nosgodos is basically Scandinavia with a bit of a fancy vibe to it. I'm sometimes not very creative, but yeah, Nosgodos does have like that history of like, oh, they did at one point, like Nosgodos is supposed to be built up of like very, like just a huge amount of like different states or countries or like little kingdoms and such. Valhalla, I think it has like a ruler of its own, but he or she doesn't have much power beyond the valley. But the idea was like, oh, if tiny place like Torstad has a university, it just gave me the vibe of like, oh, what would the big cities in Nosgodos then have? Because like this tiny place already has a university, and then the big cities would have just huge sprawling universities, and then you just get the vibe of like, hey, they put a lot of like importance on like education or just studies and such here. Just kind of challenging that vibe of like everybody in Valhalla is a warrior, everybody or every Scandinavian person in real life in the Viking era was a warrior. I just kind of wanted to challenge that by building universities. Also, I want to build a university in Conceptualizing, and I don't think my PC is going to like that, because universities are usually multiple buildings, at least they were certainly in like the medieval / Renaissance setting that most of my builds are in. But yeah, my PC is not going to like that. But anyway, then the other thing when it comes to this build, because I've now explained why this turned into universities, because of the vibe that it gave off, and that I just wanted to already build a university, and this build is just perfect for starting off that. But then there's the other thing that I need to explain, which is the Slavic architecture, because the reference image didn't have any Slavic architecture or influence as far as I saw. It did certainly give me that Slavic vibe. Then I thought like Valhalla already has some Slavic influence with Baba Yaga's build, some other buildings I gave a little bit of a Slavic influence, and with this build or with the reference image, as I said, it didn't have any Slavic influence. It was basically a fancy log cabin. Just sometimes, even if there is no real like Slavic influence or like architectural influence of any kind, sometimes it just has that vibe of like, oh, this looks, or it gives off that vibe of like, oh, this could be somewhere in like Russia or something, I don't know, but it just gave off that vibe. And then at the later end of the video I put a little bit more emphasis on that Slavic influence by building actual Slavic things, because before this build was basically just a copy of the reference image, but in the later end of the video I actually add some Slavic influences, mostly those domes. A lot of different cultures have domes, but every culture basically does domes in a slightly different way. And yeah, Slavic domes are just like a little bit different than other domes or other like dome stuff, and it was kind of fun to try and like make that work, because I couldn't just build my domes the same way I do them in Conceptualizing, because Slavic domes just have a different look. Of course they do, because it's a different architecture style. Of course, Poison. That was very well said. But yeah, so I needed to change that up. I did still include some Norse influence, because it's Valhalla. The main part is Norse, or at least the main influence point is Norse. So yeah, there's a little bit of that, but there's definitely going to be some Slavic influence as well. And also I just want to add those window trellis pieces that the Africa pack gave us work extremely well for medieval builds, because in medieval times they have like the large glass panes that we have now. They couldn't, I think, make those big enough without losing like the clarity or like the see-throughness of it all. So they had like tiny little pieces of glass, and so they would have these windows which were just basically, I don't know how you can call it, but yeah, they weren't able to make those huge glass panes without it being really expensive or really just like unclear or not see-through. So they would have these smaller glass panes set in a frame, and then if you have enough of those glass panes in a larger frame, there you have a window. And the Africa pieces work really well to get that vibe, to get that look. So I just use those constantly in this build. I think every window uses those. But yeah, when it comes to the rest of this build, I really love. Like, it just has that vibe, and actually Slavic architecture in general has this fantasy vibe. Slavic architecture is perfect if you want to build something with a fantasy fairy tale setting, if you want to make something darker and grittier, which I usually do. I love dark, creepy shit. It also works really well because you have your like very colorful and cheery Slavic architecture with just like a lot of bright colors and such. But then you also have your like more somber Slavic architecture where you're literally just going to be thinking, alright, where's the witch, where's the demon, where's the axe-wielding psychopath who's going to murder me? Slavic architecture is just so perfect for fantasy settings, and I'm somewhat, I wouldn't say disappointed, but sad that not more people are realizing that and not more people are building Slavic architecture, because it's just so perfect for your fantasy settings, because it literally just, like, Slavic architecture looks like it's ripped straight out of the pages of a fantasy novel or fairy tale novel based on like what Slavic architecture you're looking at. And also, this is just going to make me sound even more insane and make it really just like even more strange that like I'm not drunk while making these voiceovers. But when I was thinking about just like, oh, Slavic architecture is like perfect for fantasy settings, I also thought about the Kremlin, because, well, I'm also right now going to be, well, not right now, but this is going to be topped with like some of those domes that you have in Slavic architecture, which basically required me to kind of look at pieces in a different way again, which I love when I find an architecture style that challenges me, because like I've gone so used with my like Arabian, Ethiopian architecture styles, like Karamashar, all of the architecture styles I'm so used to, but Slavic architecture provides that new challenge to me of like, oh, what piece can I use for this? What piece can I use for that? But I wanted to make those domes that you have in Slavic architecture. Every culture does their domes just slightly differently, but that made me think of like, oh, domes in Slavic architecture. Of course you're going to think about the Kremlin then, but then my weird train of thought there was, what if the buildings were Arab? Because then the Kremlin looks like a desert. Like, it's so colorful, it's so bright, and colors are like really like bright red, bright green, bright blue and such. The Kremlin would be the tastiest building. It would be the most sugary sweet building as well, because it looks like dessert, or it looks like candy. So it would be like so sweet probably that you would get a stomachache and then not eat any candy for another week. In my case it would be 2 days, because I have no self-control and I love sugary things. Also, this is the first attempt at that dome, and as I said, I'm very used or very comfortable in like Arabian architecture, Ethiopian architecture. I'm also getting better at, or at least like not Ethiopian architecture in general, but like that one specific Ethiopian architecture that I use. But that means that I also, when I see a dome, I immediately just go for like, this is what I'm used to, let's use that technique, which doesn't really work, or at least the technique still works. It's just the pieces that I used so far that didn't work. Because when I looked at Slavic architecture, yes, you can still build your domes like this, where it's like the rounded pieces. But there were a lot of domes that I found that had like the more triangular patterns on it, like the pointy patterns basically. And so then I realized, I want that. Like, that looks kind of like it's, I don't know, pointy and not as friendly. Like, I didn't want this university to be friendly because It's university. It's not going to be friendly. It's going to be horror. It might give you a nice degree, but it's going to be horror while you're at it. But yeah, so I needed to change like, oh, what pieces am I going to use for this? And it was just really fun. Again, like I really love trying to explore new architectural styles that challenge me again. Because again, Arabian architecture I'm really kind of comfortable with. Ethiopian architecture I'm slightly getting more comfortable with. Valhalla is basically the project that gives me a lot of challenge still, because a lot of the Norse architecture has rounded elements and I don't like rounded elements unless it's a tower, or at least I like them, but it's somewhat difficult to build. And then Slavic architecture also just has these like features that I haven't built before, so that makes it really interesting. And yeah, by this point it was just like, this is going to be a university without any doubt, because with these domes it just looks way too fancy to just be an inn. Way too fancy. Like an inn usually is inn and tavern are usually interchangeable, but an inn usually doesn't have that like official vibe, and this building by this point had such an official vibe. Also, I'm still somewhat copying the reference image. It's an amazing image. I might drop it on the screen somewhere, I don't know, but it's an amazing image, and I was still kind of copying like where certain elements of the build were, but then like this dome is completely, it's not in the reference image. There is something like this in the reference image, but it's more of just like a regular roof, pointy such. Didn't have a dome, but I'm Poisonblade. I love my domes, so I had to place it there. And the second place where I had a dome, it didn't actually have like that upper structure. It was just, I think it was supposed to be a large chimney, but I don't know for sure. But I was just like, let's add another dome. And here is the other thing for the Slavic architecture reference, which are these sort of like arches that you see in Slavic, usually in those wooden churches, like the wooden churches that you would find in like Russia. And now I realize that I'm not completely sure. Like I know like Slavic, oh Russia, but then it's like, how far do you go before you go into other cultural architectural styles? I swear, well, I'm not good at geography. Like, I know basically every European country, but yeah, I also realized that like whenever I had like a geography test of like, oh, name every capital in Europe, name every capital in Africa, name every capital in Asia. They didn't do that with the US or like North America, because we would just say Washington, or just like we wouldn't go into states. I have no idea what's like, there are 50 or 51 states. Yeah, I have zero knowledge about the US geography. But anyway, that's a weird tangent. But yeah, this is the other reference to Slavic architecture with these like, well, they aren't usually windows, I think, in churches, but I changed it into a window here. I changed it into a dormer, actually, to put on the roof, because otherwise the roof would just look so flat. So I didn't want to do that, so I made these dormers, and they just add that perfect vibe of slightly creepy, slightly fantasy, but also slightly official looking for some reason. Maybe because I basically ripped these references or this influence from churches. Churches are official buildings in my head. Anyway, so by this point, I was already completely certain like, oh, how I want to approach this building and such. And then, yeah, it was just like sitting back and seeing the build come together. And then, like, this is going to be a completely off the, like, because most of the building right now is done, so I want to just go on a tangent and say I'm weird. I don't think that's something new, but I go on these weird YouTube binges where loads of the time I'm binging documentaries. I'm right now binging a documentary on life on a Tudor farm. I already seen the one, like it's a series where it's like life on a Tudor farm, life on a Victorian farm, life on an Edwardian farm, life on a wartime farm. There's also a series about building a castle with like how they would have built it, and I'm just like, I have seen this documentary before. Why am I constantly rewatching it? And then also realizing, I don't actually watch any Planet Zoo content. I've already mentioned this a lot of times before, and I already mentioned a lot of times what the reason is, because for those who don't know, yeah, I don't watch any YouTube Planet Zoo content, or at least most of the time I don't, and it's mostly because I play Planet Zoo so much that the time that I have off, I want to watch something else. Like, I've seen this game so many hours of the day that I'm like, as soon as I have free time, I'm just like, yeah, put on a documentary on a Tudor farm. But yeah, I mean, a lot of like ideas for builds I get from documentaries because I'm just like, oh, they would have that. Oh, I can build that. I am building that. Oh god, help me. I'm lost. Run for your lives. Kind of like that. So, like, there's a lot of people that, like, I know quite a lot of YouTube Planet Zoo content creators, and I feel like I need to apologize, but I don't watch a lot of videos when it comes to Planet Zoo. But then also, like, please say that I'm not weird, but when it comes to like subscriptions, I basically monthly look through my subscription box and just unsubscribe to things or people that I haven't watched that month, and I just get anxious as soon as I have like more than 6 subscriptions. Like if I have any more, like you can have like a drop down thing for like your subscription. As soon as it drop or is able to be dropped down, well, you can still drop down, but as soon as the list becomes too long, I'm just like, no. So yeah, I don't watch a lot of Planet Zoo content, and also my subscription feed is tiny. Other thing that I need to mention, besides just the weird YouTube things that I do, is I've finally gotten my first vaccine shot. This is also just to notify you guys for get your vaccine shots, dumbasses. Don't be an idiot, get them. Like, I'm not that, like, you would think that I would be good with like, you know, shots, because I built a lot of dark, creepy shit, so you would think that I would be good with that. But no, like the entire, well, it didn't hurt or anything. It was like done in 5 seconds. But I had to watch away, like look physically the other direction. I don't want to see the needle going into my arm, but I still got the needle in my arm because, again, get your vaccination, you bastards. But yeah. Now I can talk to ducks. I wish I got that ability through the vaccine, but no. I just have a kind of stiff arm. And yeah, I'm literally recording this the day of getting that shot, getting that needle stuck in my arm. Well, not stuck, but you know what I mean. Anyway, so now we're finally doing some terrain work. And as I said, this, or might have said, by this point I don't know what I've said or have said. That's usually kind of the flaw of being unscripted. I sometimes repeat things in the same voiceover. But this university is going to be a multiple-parter. I'm thinking of building a bridge from Torstedt to the university. At first I was going to build this university in Torstedt, but then I thought of like, oh, what are universities in the medieval era? And then I immediately thought of Oxford, and then I also thought of The Witcher with Oxenford, I think. And those were all like outside of cities, outside of towns and such. And then I thought, yeah, let's do that. Not just because I can make it larger if I don't put it in Torstedt. Definitely not that. Definitely actually that. I definitely just want to make it larger than I could if I placed it in the walls of Torstedt. So yeah, that's basically the entire gist of today's video. I am insane, I am a dumbass, I sometimes just get way too hooked onto one image, and now I want to build an entire university just because of one image. But then I've already started a Pinterest search for all the other buildings in the university. I want to do something with like, I don't know, greenhouses, maybe like astrology kind of thing. I don't know. Here is the question that I can ask you guys, because otherwise I will just be like ranting, and then you guys are thinking like, what the hell can I say, because none of this made sense. But here's a direct question that I can ask you guys. What subjects would you think would be taught in Valhalla? Like, I think biology, astronomy, or astrology, but I also think like medicine and such. I don't know, something just with nature, because Valhalla is supposed to be the last bastion, like the Valley of Valhalla is supposed to be the last bastion of civilization before you get into the unexplored wild Northlands. So I do think like something with nature would be studied here. But anyway, that's going to be it for today. So again, the question is, what type of subjects do you think they would teach at this university? Because I don't think they would teach everything here. It's not large enough to do that. Or not going to be. Poison, remind yourself, it's not going to be a huge university. Don't build a huge university. Build a huge university. Alright, I will build a huge university. Anyway, that's going to be it for today. So there is the like and subscribe button if you want to see more. There's a notification button, but before that one starts working, I will be back in Canon Shard to finish it off, because I am not running away from responsibilities, I swear, you guys. And with that being said, let's end this video. Have an amazing day, guys. Bye bye.